You're looking good, and it feels good to be with you today. Hello, I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, author of this book, Consider My Servant Job, on sale now. There's some holiday that's coming up somewhere along the line. You can find an excuse to buy this. I'll talk about my book. It's something my publisher wants me to do, but this is just you, me, and the truth. I don't have an intro like a theme song. I don't sell t-shirts. I don't sell bobbleheads. I'm here to talk about the gospel. I'm author of that book, and this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up, I always come prepared, we never take roll, and I always get to the point. So today's theme is the second vision, prayer, plates, and translation. So we've had the first vision, and Joseph Smith continues along in his life and doesn't quite get an answer as dramatic as he had beforehand. And remember, he had not been given the gift of the Holy Ghost yet. He's just functioning under the light of Christ, and whatever happened in the premortal existence related to his foreordination as prophet. But he says he's praying for forgiveness of sins. And remember, this is the two questions, first vision and second vision, sins and then church. There's a tendency to within the framework of Martin Luther, to focus on sins and see church as a second thing, to the point where people say I'm spiritual but not religious, or this is the gimmick that some Protestant churches use now. Yeah, we're about religion, not church. And, well, oh, wow, that sounds great. So just show up. You want me to show up to your church then? Okay, so back to Joseph Smith. Praying for forgiveness of sins. I have not, neither can it be sustained in truth, been guilty of any wrongdoing or injuring any man or society of men, and those imperfections to which I allude, and for which I have often been occasion to lament, were a light and too often vain mind, exhibiting a fooling and trifling conversation. Now, in King James English, conversation means conduct. However, language may have shifted by this time to mean his behavior versus his conversation. Behavior, conversation are two things. But getting back to Joseph Smith, this being all in the worst my accusers can substantiate against my moral character, I wish to add that it's not without a deep feeling of regret that I am thus called upon to answer to my own conscience. And that's an article he wrote to the Messenger and Advocate. This would make a great footnote the next time they update the scriptures. As Joseph Smith said, he had his levity, and he had a native cheery temperament. So he prays, and in response, we get Moroni's Three-peat, where he repeats a message. Joseph Smith said that he had a work of translation. It's interesting, during the process of the vision with Moroni, he mentions that he had a vision open to his mind so he could see where the plates were buried of the hill Cumorah. And it's interesting how revelations are like that. Well, when we hit section, I think it's 84 or 109, I think it's 107, you read this portion is that Joseph Smith has the text of the revelation, and this was given over different places. It wasn't given all in one text dump. But there's a vision in the mind accompanying this that we don't have recorded about how to do things. This was in one of the Kirtland Minute Book. I think it's Minute Book 1, as they call it now, is this recorded. We've recorded a vision of Joseph, that Joseph Smith had about how the ancient high council used to function. He's able, from getting this vision, he's able to understand how to do modern high councils. So he had a vision in his mind, and he had the three visits. Fortunately, Elder David A. Bedmar gave a nice talk about it called Repeat Again the Same Things as Before. I think it's off of BYU, Idaho. But their school paper is called The Scroll, the Daily Universe for BYU and The Scroll for BYU, Idaho. Now, what's interesting is not everything that Moroni told Joseph Smith is recorded in the Pearl of Great Price. So I have a link to Kent B. Jackson's Moroni's Message to Joseph Smith. The link is notes.nephi.org, and that has a little bit, almost all the scriptures that Moroni quoted Joseph Smith. It's interesting, a lot of Isaiah. Have you broken this Isaiah phobia? No. Here's two rules of life. One, life is difficult. Rule two is once you admit that life is difficult, life suddenly becomes easy because you're no longer in denial. So Joseph Smith, he's out in the farm. He gets exhausted. His dad tells him to go home. He passes out while hopping the fence. He gets the fourth peat, and then his dad tells him to go off and to Hill Camorra. He goes there, and apparently he has a lever with him. He's able to pry the top off the box. Now, it's interesting. In other accounts, when Joseph Smith would give an account, he'd sometimes compress details. But in other accounts, he gets into more details. For example, with the first time he went to the plates, he digs it. This is from the Messenger and Advocate. He digs it up. He sees the plates, and he reaches in and sets them aside. And he wonders, okay, is there anything else in there? When he looked to the side where the plates were, they disappeared. And okay, what's going on? Then the angel Moroni appears to him and says, look, you're not taking this seriously. Don't lose these plates. Don't let them get out of hand. And then Joseph Smith has this interesting vision of good and evil, how good and evil would arise in the last days, and he had to rebury the plates. And he comes back there for several years. There's some legends about Joseph Smith would have to dig up Alvin Smith's body. That is from church critical sources. By church critical, I mean anti-Mormon sources. There's this letter that I think Joseph Smith Sr. had to write the newspaper saying, no, we're not digging up. He wasn't dug up for an autopsy or anything like that. But Moroni wanted Joseph Smith to have someone with him when he got the plates, and that was Emma. So they rode at nighttime, and Emma's there alone, and Joseph Smith comes back with the plates. And it's interesting is that, and they had to hide them at various locations. You can read about them in the book Saints, Volume 1. So they had the plates, portion of it was sealed. There's some question whether it was 1/3 or 2/3. I've seen sources for that, and that's the problem. How accurate are these sources? And you have two equally accurate sources saying different things. How do you sort it out? All we know that a portion was sealed. And people who lifted the plates say it weighed about 50 pounds. Now it's interesting because it was made of solid gold. It'd weigh 100 pounds. You can do the mathematics on it. So presumably the gold plates were actually an alloy. There's a common alloy in South America called tumbaga. It's a mixture of gold and copper. And when you read the text of the Book of Mormon, they do mention copper a lot in the Book of Mormon, bronze and stuff. Get into some paleometallurgy. That's fun stuff to read up on. People focus on the Book of Mormon mentioning steel, but there's other metallurgical stuff that's going on there. They just, for some reason, they just can't see. That's as interesting. So, the translation process. He says that he copied characters off the plates. And from that copy, he started translating it. That's verse 62. Now, there's an interesting Hoffman forgery. Well, first of all, is that it's a circle, and there's some characters in there, and it's just a Hoffman forgery. You can look it up. But it's interesting, there's this other list of characters. Now, this called characters, and this was in the possession of the Community of Christ in this recent purchase where we got the Kirtland Temple and the Joseph Smith translation manuscripts. This is one of the documents we got. It's in our possession. We've known about it. It was in the Joseph Smith papers, but you may have seen this version of the Book of Mormon that was published in the 1970s. It's a goldback, and I have a copy of it, but it's stuck in storage, and so it's showing a picture of it on the phone. But the characters on this version of the Book of Mormon were copied from that reorganized document that was in the reorganized church for a long time. And so it's funny, I grew up looking at it, and we're still not sure what to make of it. There's been attempts to translate it. Let's see. Hoffman Book of Mormon forgery characters. Now, during the translation process, Joseph Smith did not keep a log. This is not like Star Trek, Captain's log, where he said, okay, we translated this much. I used the seer stone, I used the Urim and Thummim. This person was my scribe. We translated X number of pages. We don't have the original manuscript. We have fragments of it, I think about 23%. We do have the printer's manuscript also in the care of the Community of Christ, which we bought. We're going to take good care of them, and we're not going to have to license them out. Here it is. This is a sample. This is the Hoffman forgery of the characters. It looks like that. And they were published in a first edition of Personal Writings of Joseph Smith. They've since been taken out. But of course, we have the internet to find all that stuff. So I was getting back to the log. Joseph Smith did not keep a log about how he translated. So we're doing some guesswork. And this is where some of the confusion comes in about who translated, who was the scribe. Emma Smith and other people were the scribes. And then we have some interesting, there's a source that comes from John Whitmer, and he describes how Joseph Smith would see this parchment and they'd read off the characters. And that's interesting. I'm curious about the source of that because John Whitmer never used the Urim and Thummim. Joseph Smith did, Oliver Cowdery did, and Oliver Cowdery was successful for a little bit, then he just doubted and he stopped working. Just two sources of how it worked. And this is what Joseph Smith said. This is from the Far West Record, a minute book 2 on the Joseph Smith papers. Quote, Brother Joseph Smith said that it was not intended to tell the world all the particulars of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, and also that it was not expedient to relate these things. So where did John Whitmer get that statement from? It looks like it wasn't from Joseph Smith, so was it Oliver Cowdery? So I'm a little bit more conservative than some people. Some people just get, oh, wow, we have this source, let's get all excited about it. And that's this thing is just an emotional. People will just getting caught up with the, the popping popcorn and excitement and just like, okay, look, let's stop and think about this and maybe a little bit more than we actually know. We have the Anthem incident with Martin Harris. And it's interesting because the place of scholarship and seership, double-checking our revelations. When you read the Book of Abraham, there's discussions because we have some things that are fragments. Like I said, I'm a little bit more cautious on this. It looks like it because we don't have the original source, but it looks similar because we don't know what the full original source looked like. It looks like it could be, but I'm not going to say it is for 100% certain. Facsimile number 2, it's interesting when you read the notes is that Joseph Smith invites the world to translate it. Now, if the world can figure out what these are, let them be. And so we've been doing that. And there's been several translations of, let me pause for a second. Several translations of facsimile number 2. One of my professors at BYU, Mideast professor Michael Rhodes, he's translated it twice, and it was on the internet. I don't know if it's gone away now. Then Hugh Nibley's book, One Eternal Round, where he has a translation of it. It's interesting because Michael Rhodes, now this was back in 1995 when he told this story, so I may not be remembering it correctly. But this is what he said, is he was really interested that he wanted to get a degree focusing on Egyptology. However, his advisor didn't think that a member of the church could be an objective Egyptologist, so he wouldn't approve him. So my professor had to drop out. He joined the Air Force, taught physics there, but he kept up his language and was able to do 2 translations, got a job at BYU. Kind of a nice, quirky guy, one of these fun professors that you remember. A bit like having Brent Spiner as your professor. But in what's the place, and scholarship can be helpful, it can be hurtful. I've seen people with degrees and they get acculturated and they just turn around and march back and try to convert people at BYU to their academic training. I take a different approach. I tend to be a bit more cautious. The more dogmatic, logical A statements, categorical assertions you make, you're just setting yourself to have egg in your face. History is an inductive process. It's a survivability. We can only study what has survived. And so we have to be very cautious and don't make overclaimings. The Dunn-Kruger effect, that's the one I was trying to remember last week, the Dunn-Kruger effect, where you think you know more than you actually know. Now, this is what I do. My degree is in history. I minored in political science. I just say I admit there's a discrepancy. I don't try to force things or to wrest scriptures, contort things, treat scriptures like a wad of silly putty and just wrap them around everything. I just say from the current state of things, from the information we have at present, we can't resolve this discrepancy. And I put a qualifier in there. Some people don't put qualifiers, and they're just people like the confidence, but it's just like you're making stuff and we're picking up on it. So this is what I do. For scholarly publications, I will say scholarship suggests X. then put the church's point of view, like say from the Joseph Smith translation or something Joseph Smith taught, in a footnote. And most publications will let you get away with that because they understand where you're coming from. It's like, as long as you're towing the scholarship line and you put it in a footnote, which people don't read anyways, it'll work out. But then I do the exact opposite. I do the exact opposite for a church publication. So I was doing something, I'd say, okay, this is what the church teaches, but a footnote scholarship suggests another interpretation. For example, this is really sort of a dark example, is Lot's daughter in the book of Genesis. And an incident happened there where, as it stands in the King James, Lot offered up his daughters to a rape gang. And I heard a BYU professor who was specialized in Hebrew stuff said this is about how Jews understand hospitality. They're so hospitable they'll offer up their children to be raped. We know from the Joseph Smith translation, no. But my friend was just repeating scholarship and not making this distinction. Okay, this is what scholarship says. This is what church. This is what the seership says. So we're in church. Let's follow the seers, and don't overclaim things. Dunn-Kruger effect. And here's point number 3, Doctrine and Covenants, section 2, Joseph Smith Manual, chapter 26. I hope you. I hope you haven't tossed this out or use it as a doorstop, that you keep this up. And chapter 26 talks about the spirit of Elijah and gives more statements about what Joseph Smith taught about Elijah. It's interesting. I'll reveal to you the priesthood by the hand of my servant Elijah. That's interesting. Priesthood's a revelation. We don't claim it. It's well, I was going to say, so I'll just say this right now, is what happened when at the Diet of Worms, Martin Luther, I think it was in the Babylonian captivity thing, he made this point that the scripture doesn't talk about something called the papacy. You have apostles, you don't have a pope there. Pontiff, that's the Latin term for a priest. It means bridge builder in Latin. Same Latin language as pont means bridge. That's a priestly name. So Martin Luther said, wait, this whole thing about having a pope and this pope's absolute temporal authority, that's not in the scriptures. What he did is he replaced with something called priesthood of all believers. And that comes from Peter. First is from the writings of Peter, that you're a royal priest. I think that's First Peter. But you see what he did? He said, hey, look, this isn't something talked about, and he just makes up something, the priesthood of all believers, which also wasn't, no one ever thought about that prior to Martin Luther, but he just made that up. And we're doing something different. This is a revelation. It focuses on children turning their hearts towards the Father, binding the hearts, this affection. King James and this revelation are a little bit different. One says utterly wasted, the other one says smitten with a curse. Doctrine and Covenants, section 38 uses both, so both are accurate. And that's interesting about how Scripture is a little bit more fluid. Back to Martin Luther, we don't believe in this infallible Bible, so we actually have an article of faith to that point. Sorry, my throat's a little bit dry. It's snowing right here in Provo, so I get this really good light. Now, compelling clues about Joseph Smith's experience. There's interesting, the details of the vision. He describes Moroni's address, talks about the light dancing around Moroni, how the light behaves. Same thing with the first vision, just a lot of light involved. It's interesting. Joseph Smith remembers this intense text dump. Now, he heard it 4 times, but he was able to remember it and also notice the differences in what's being said. Truman Madsen he was a BYU professor, gave a number of lectures about Joseph Smith, and the second lecture actually where he talks about Joseph Smith's memory, and this is something to think about. So I put a link below there, but you can go to the BYU Speeches website, and then Truman Madsen, it's lecture number 2, where he talks about it. The three-peat. Remember this pattern of repeating things 3 times so it sinks in. That's what Peter had with his kosher vision. They got the vision 3 times, make sure it sets in. Details of the stone box, how it was cement, there was stones crossed on the bottom. Now, another thing, too, is Joseph Smith, when he met with Moroni, got a lot of information from him that's lost. Lucy says, during our evening conversations, Joseph would occasionally give us some of the most amusing recitals that could be imagined. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, their mode of traveling, the animals upon which they rode, curl-ons and come-ons, their cities or buildings, every particular mode, elephants and horses, their mode of warfare, and also the religious worship. This he would do at as much ease, seemingly as if he'd spent his whole life among them. Think about that. Joseph Smith saw a lot more. This helped him translate. So when he's translating, he has like I said, the visual component to a revelation. He saw what Nephites look like, what their books look like, these animals that aren't mentioned, what the Ziph is. That's lost. It was never recorded, and it's a shame. And it's interesting as all this lost information, some of these questions and conundrums we have, would these be resolved if Joseph Smith had recorded these things or he was in a situation? You can find that in Early Mormon Documents, Volume 1, page 296, and that's from the History of Joseph Smith by his mother. Another good detail is Joseph Smith's voice in telling his story is very straightforward and unadorned. You have the flowery flourishes of Oliver Cowdery. It gets grating. This is just Joseph Smith telling his story as best he could and not trying to impress anyone. Contrast this with people who criticize the church. They get on, they do, I call it personal apostasy performance art. The theatrics involved, the sarcasm and the viciousness, and especially the merchandising. You're criticizing the church. Okay, I'll allow you a book. I do that. Maybe you want to get a book out, or if you're selling T-shirts and bobbleheads while you're criticizing the church, like, no, sorry, man, you're just merchandising this. People talk about people merchandising faith, how faith is a racket, and yeah, it can be. Indulgence is Martin Luther. So is atheism. Atheism wear bobbleheads, bumper stickers. Seen that fish that says Darwin. I mean, there you go. Well, here we are at the Christ quotient, 22 minutes. Begin with the atonement quotient. That's because President Nelson wanted us to spend every week, this portion of our time every week, studying the atonement. What's the connection between the sealing and the atonement? You understand that we take a stance is that in America, the predominant faith is Southern Baptist. So it's these Martin Luther derivative pseudo-Protestantism, and we're grateful for the Reformation, but we're not a Reformed church. People see the priesthood in Protestantism as a free-floating faith. So in Catholicism, you have the sacrament of holy orders. So you get your authority traced back to the Pope or someone along the line. Like we trace our authority back, and you can get that online now on your phone app when you go to your membership information. But with Protestantism, you get your degree, and it's a free-floating power. We have an article of faith about laying on of hands. This isn't like training under a Jedi and just getting the Force, or going to Hogwarts and getting your education and learning how to practice magic there. You need order. You need priesthood order and authority and authorizations. The same thing with the ordinances of the gospel. You need authority. You need a sealing ordinance. You need these other priesthood ordinances. It's interesting. Joseph Fielding McConkie and Craig Ostler, two BYU professors, and they wrote one of the Doctrine and Covenants commentaries I use called Revelations of the Restoration. And they made the point is, you go to a Protestant, they'll say, have you been saved? Well, our answer is, well, have you been sealed? And essentially, we'll talk about they'll use sealing in a way that means they've felt the Holy Ghost on their heart, but something like, have you been sealed in the temple in the way that we understand it? We're talking, this is not a mix of Protestantism and Freemasonry. This is something really different. Well, the Book of Mormon, about the atonement, Book of Mormon is a witness of Jesus Christ and has the best teachings on the atonement. Since we discussed that last year, I don't want to be repetitive, but never forget that. Never stop reading the Book of Mormon. See, the restoration is really about restoring the doctrine of Jesus Christ and the power of Jesus Christ's atonement. He had to translate the Book of Mormon to get the message of the atonement out. get the message of the Messiah out. The mission of the Messiah, the message of the mission of the Messiah, the message of the mission of the Messiah out. That's what the Book of Mormon's about. He's restoring doctrine. He's restoring priesthood. He's restoring sealing power and sealing keys. There's a difference between holding the sealing power and holding sealing keys. Elijah held sealing keys, but Nephi, son of Nephi in the Book of Mormon, held the power, but apparently he didn't hold the keys. These all give us the full blessings of Christ's atonement. Remember, this is a restored church. This is different. This is not someone hitting a wood shop, picking a piece. Okay, here's Luther. Let's do Freemasonry. Let's do Swedenborg. Let's kind of put them all together, sew it together like a crazy quilt or something like that. This is a seamless whole. Sealing power. That's the fullest expression of Christ's atonement. And Jesus Christ, that's the point.